Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. There's a reason that Sky Sports UK has been fiercely protecting its investment in Anthony Joshua. Put simply, he's a cash cow bringing in huge pay-per-view numbers, and as a result, he's making money for them. A lot of money. And that cash cow mantle, it's again being confirmed by numbers that World Boxing News has published on pay-per-view buys in the United Kingdom. And perhaps it's no surprise, Anthony Joshua dominates the UK pay-per-view landscape, holding the two top pay-per-view events ever held in the UK. But the caveat to the numbers, the WBN numbers that I'm about to discuss and dissect, is they were, as WBN puts it, taken from various media reports, sources, plus the Broadcasters Audience Research Board. So can we take them to be 100% accurate? Possibly not. But are they in the ballpark? Probably. And before I launch into things, I thought I would note that the timing of these figures coming out is very interesting. Pay-per-view numbers in the UK are not routinely reported in a meaningful way like they are in the United States, which, because you don't get the numbers, it leaves fans and media wondering, well, how big a draw is a guy like Anthony Joshua? How big a draw really is he? You kind of have to go off what a promoter says, and that's not always a good situation to be in because they will feed us line after line of whatever they want to tell us. But the timing of this and the oddly specific numbers makes me wonder, is this part of some sort of communications response to the developing behemoth that will be the Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury pay-per-view event in the United States at the end of this year? Remember, Frank Warren and others have claimed that the fight between Wilder and Fury is the biggest that can be made in the heavyweight division. A lot of people do have their doubts about that, because a fight with Anthony Joshua with either Fury or Wilder, in my view, is a bigger fight. But, if you have your opinion and it's different to mine, well, that's fine. But these Joshua figures, they put a yardstick in the ground to compare to in terms of the pay-per-view buys. And it's not quite like for like, it's not apples for apples, because remember, we're talking two different markets here. But the AJ numbers do serve to remind us that there's a guy not in the Fury-Wilder fight who's got 3 belts. He's been dominating the pay-per-view landscape in the heavyweight division for the past couple of years, and it gives us a helpful reference point to work from. Let's crack into it though. First off, so Anthony Joshua versus Dillian Whyte, 420,000 buys on Sky Sports in late 2015. Both these guys at the time were fringe contenders, no belts were on the line. And if we extrapolate the 420,000 buys out at the pay-per-view price of then $16.95, that's over £7 million of pay-per-view revenue generated by that fight. Not bad for two guys who no belts on the line, it was just a domestic clash. Then we move to April 2016. Joshua fights Charles Martin. That's where he obviously won his IBF strap. 500,000 buys. Joshua versus first title defense of Dominic Breazeale, June 2016. 512,000 buys. The second defense against Eric Molina in December of that year. That did 450,000 buys. And it must be noted that card was definitely saved by the Dillian Whyte and Derek Chisora fight because it was a weak main event, and I think perhaps reflected in the lower number of buys there. Things though, they really went into overdrive as Joshua set a pay-per-view record for an event held in the UK when he fought Vladimir Klitschko in April 2017. 1.532 million pay-per-view buys. A UK record. That's over £30 million in UK pay-per-view revenue. Not bad at all. In October 2017, Joshua fights late replacement Carlos Takam, 887,000 pay-per-view buys. And in his most recent fight, Joshua drew 1.457 million buys in the unification clash with then WBO champion Joseph Parker. So Anthony Joshua, looking at the numbers, he owns the 2 top spots on the UK pay-per-view list. And to put it into context with the next best locally staged event is 890,000 buys for the first Hay Bellew fight. I was a little surprised at that number, but it's then followed in fourth spot by the Takam and Joshua fight, 887,000, as I've already mentioned. For fights involving a British fighter fighting overseas but sold as a pay-per-view in the United Kingdom, for context, we've got Lennox Lewis and Mike Tyson in 2002. That drew 750,000 buyers in the UK. Mayweather and Hatton, 1.15 million. Hey Klitschko, 1.143 million. Mayweather Pacquiao, 876,000. And Klitschko vs Fury, 545,000. It all shows Anthony Joshua is a proven commodity. There's kind of no disputing that, really. He's drawing historically big numbers. Some of the names that I've just listed, even though some of those fights were overseas, it shows the interest in Joshua in the UK, and obviously for UK staged events, #1 by a mile. And we've heard from Frank Warren recently that BT Sport wanted to get the rights to the Joshua and Wilder fight if that fight could be made. And you can see why. It would attract huge buys and make mega bank. I said consistently through the Wilder and Joshua negotiation debacle that sort of dragged on for 3 months, that a large part of the negotiations was about power and control. No one wanted to lose control of that fight, and that was proven out. And you can see why, because whoever holds the rights to it in the UK will be guaranteed a monstrous pay-per-view event. I think it would generate more than the 1.53 million record that currently stands between Klitschko and Joshua. We also have to remember the UK pay-per-view revenue is but one revenue stream. So you've got all sorts of other revenue streams, including advertising, sponsorships, merchandise, the all-important live gate, and international broadcasting rights. So it's definitely a situation with Anthony Joshua that any fight he's in, a massive amount of money is on the line. And the international broadcasting situation, that's an interesting one because the revenue generated, it's largely unknown. It's a sort of hidden source of money that we don't really see because it's sort of separate to headline figures. And they do sort of talk up the sort of, wall-to-wall coverage around the world. And you have to think about, well, actually, if a fight's showing in over 200 countries and territories, that's generating some serious cash. There's a lot of broadcasters who are paying for that. And quite a few broadcasters are also doing their own pay-per-view, once they've got the rights. And obviously, some of that is going back to Matchroom and such. My own personal experience with that is an Anthony Joshua card. It hasn't just been on, subscription television New Zealand. It's been on pay-per-view for quite some time. It's been at least $34.95 in New Zealand dollars to watch Anthony Joshua since the Molina fight back in late 2016. That sort of stuff, it's all topping up the pot. Someone is getting paid, and getting paid quite a bit. As an example, Matchroom and Duco, they recently split the profits from the New Zealand and Australian pay-per-view buys for the Dillian Whyte and Joseph Parker fight. And say if that attracted 40,000 buys in New Zealand at $50 a pop. Even after you strip out the cut that the broadcaster in New Zealand takes for clipping the pay-per-view ticket, there's serious cash being made. And I guess one of the perils with this sort of video where I'm examining what effectively is sort of part of Anthony Joshua's commercial success and appeal is that people who don't like Anthony Joshua, supporters of other opposing fighters, they're going to be piling in trying to discredit his accomplishments. And what I can guarantee is I'm going to see some comments, because most of the people who leave them will have already stopped watching the video because they can't bring themselves to actually hear anything positive about Anthony Joshua. And people who aren't fans of Tyson Fury or Deontay Wilder, they also do the same thing. I mean, sometimes I think people just need to grow up. But I can guarantee what I'm also going to see is that in terms of Anthony Joshua, his pay-per-view success in the UK, there'll be comments to the effect of, well, it's only the UK. They're cheap pay-per-views anyway, it doesn't matter. In America, we charge way more, we can generate more money from pay-per-views. And in terms of generating more money in America for a pay-per-view, per view, well, that's certainly true. The UK pay-per-view cost, when you sort of do the conversion, it's about the equivalent of $25. And the same event staged in the US, if you were to say do Joshua and Parker in the US, that would be $50, $60, $70, as opposed to the £20 or the equivalent of $25 US if you staged it, or it was staged in the UK. There is a difference in price point. But I would note, a key difference is broadcasters in the US, they are only going to pay-per-view if they know it's going to be successful. You can guarantee there's no way HBO or Showtime would have ever pulled the trigger on Dillian Whyte and Joseph Parker being a pay-per-view. If they're charging $50 to $80 US, they have to have confidence that the event is going to sell. And thus only a select group of elite fighters like Triple G, like Canelo, are on pay-per-view consistently. And in a way, because this reluctance to sort of pull the trigger on a pay-per-view, because not knowing if it's going to be a success, this has actually worked against someone like a Deontay Wilder, for example. Let's face it, if he was fighting out of the UK and had been champion for the past 3 years fighting out of the UK, he would have been on pay-per-view by now. But until now, there's been no conscious effort to put his fights on to pay-per-view in the US by Showtime. And some of that will be because Showtime didn't know if they could generate the revenue and the buys to make it viable. They didn't want to take the risk and, have it tank. But what we do now have is a situation where the WBC champion Deontay Wilder is going to face lineal champion Tyson Fury. It is the perfect opportunity for a pay-per-view event. And to some extent, it's going to help establish properly some of Deontay Wilder's commercial value. Because say that event does, 700,000 buys or 900,000, 1 million buys, something like that. It's going to give him, and Fury for that matter, some clout if they enter into negotiations with Anthony Joshua down the line. Because obviously that's the fight everyone's sort of got their eye on the horizon. Whoever comes out of this Wilder-Fury fight is going to eventually, potentially, hopefully, fight Anthony Joshua. That's the fight we want to see. We want to know who's the best in the division. At the moment, we can only speculate. But as I've laid out in this video, Anthony Joshua, he's got a history of pulling down big pay-per-view numbers. He's packing out stadiums with 80 or 90,000 people. So this is why Joshua and his promoter, Eddie Hearn, are not willing to entertain the idea of a 50-50 split with the likes of Wilder or Fury if they are to fight. But Wilder and Fury can help claw back a little bit of ground if they do have a successful pay-per-view event of their own. And as for Joshua's upcoming fight with Alexander Povetkin, I think it will probably be similar to the Takam fight, so maybe somewhere around 900,000 buys, potentially 1 million. I'm just not convinced there's the same level of interest in that fight, and I laid out some reasons, previously. I don't think there's the same level of interest compared to the Vlad or Parker fights. There's just not as much on the line. There's not as much buzz and hype and expectation for that fight. Well, not yet anyway. I think there'll be a late sort of surge of interest, but I think, that in terms of interest is capped potentially to 900 or 1 million buys. I mean, time will tell on that. But in the scheme of things, still, it's going to generate serious cash. The gate sales, obviously huge, 80, 90,000 people selling the broadcasting rights and all the other things that are wrapped up in these massive events. What do you make of it all? What did you make of Anthony Joshua's pay-per-view numbers that WBN has published? Drop a comment loud and often, hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.